The dressing room was almost silent, except for the faint buzz of a dying bulb above the cracked mirror. The air still carried the echo of applause, thin, distant, like it belonged to someone else now. Michael sat alone in front of the mirror, the brim of his hat resting against his knee. Sweat ran down the back of his neck, tracing the rhythm of a heartbeat that hadn't yet learned to slow down. He looked at himself, or at least, at the version of himself the mirror offered. 18 years old. The world saw a legend in progress. He saw a boy who wasn't sure whose face was staring back. A knock at the door startled him. Neil, his manager, leaned in, all teeth and perfume. "You killed it out there, kid. Press wants a few words, just give them that smile, yeah." Michael nodded without looking up. "Yeah." When the door clicked shut, the silence returned, heavier this time. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring deeper. The reflection blinked, just a moment too late. He frowned, rubbed his eyes. "You're just tired." The reflection blinked again, this time smiling faintly, a smile he didn't make. Michael laughed nervously and turned away. But as he picked up the towel, something in him refused to move on. He turned back. The smile was gone. Only his tired face stared back now, pale and hollow. The hallway outside was long and narrow, lined with posters from old tours, his own face staring back at him in 100 fixed smiles. The fluorescent lights hummed like restless insects. He passed a warped mirror near the end of the corridor. The reflection stretched his arms too long, his legs too thin. He leaned closer. The reflection tilted its head slightly to the left, before he did. A chill ran up his spine. "Okay," he murmured, forcing a grin. "You win." He turned and walked away, trying to laugh, but the sound echoed strangely, like the hallway itself was mocking him. His apartment in Laurel Canyon was small and spare. No awards on the wall, no gold records. Just a bed, a notebook, and a cheap mirror on the dresser. He sat cross-legged on the floor, pen scratching on paper that already overflowed with half-finished lyrics. "I can't feel the floor anymore. The floor feels me. The boy in the glass knows the steps I forgot." He stopped. A faint tapping came from the mirror. Once. Twice. He looked up. The mirror trembled. Not from vibration. It looked like something beneath the surface had just exhaled. Michael rose slowly, heart hammering in his chest. The reflection waited, perfectly still. "You're not real," he whispered. The reflection's lips moved, but no sound came. He leaned closer. It whispered again, silent words that slid through him like a dream he couldn't catch. Then came a pulse, deep, internal. Not through his ears but in his ribs. Like a speaker had switched on beneath his skin. He stumbled backward, gasping. When he looked again, the mirror was still. He pressed his palm against his chest and laughed breathlessly. "You're tired, man. That's all." He turned off the light, but as the room darkened, the mirror glowed faintly, a soft, ghostly silver that didn't go away when he closed his eyes. Morning came with the cold light of an office full of chrome and glass. The labels conference room gleamed like a cage polished for display. Neil sat across from him, flipping through a folder filled with color mock-ups. "You're a star, Michael," he said, tapping one of the photos. "But we need to shape the light. Cleaner. Brighter. No shadows." Michael's gaze drifted to the mirrored wall behind him. The reflection there didn't quite match his movements. Its eyes looked darker, deeper. "What if the shadows are the point?" he said softly. Neil laughed the way businessmen do when they don't understand something but don't want to admit it. Audiences want to feel good. Sometimes they feel good when they see truth. "Truth doesn't test well," Neil said. "Smiles sell. That's the job." Michael nodded slowly, though the words barely reached him. He stood to leave, pausing at the door. "Maybe I'll see something else when the posters go up." Neil watched him go, suddenly unsure whether the boy was joking. That night, The rehearsal studio was empty. Just the sound of a ticking metronome echoing through the wooden floor. Michael stood in front of the long wall mirror, hat in hand. He started slow, footwork, turns, slides. Then faster, sharper. Every motion was clean, but something was wrong. His reflection lagged, a half-beat late. He stopped. The reflection didn't. It kept moving, finishing the sequence without him. He froze. The air in the room changed, heavier, closer. His pulse quickened. The reflection turned to face him directly. It smiled faintly, not menacingly, but knowingly, as if it understood something he didn't. Michael stepped forward until his breath fogged the glass. He pressed his palm to the surface. Warm. Not cold like glass should be. He jerked his hand back. A small red mark glowed on his skin. "What are you?" he whispered. The reflection tilted its head, like a teacher waiting for a student to answer his own question. Then it leaned closer. Michael's breath caught. His heart hammered in his ears. The reflection raised a hand, and though the glass didn't move, he felt it. A pressure, a pulse, right over his chest. And then, a voice, soft and impossible, inside his mind. "Keep going." The metronome clicked twice, then cracked under his heel as he stumbled backward. Silence filled the room. Michael stared at his reflection, breathing hard. The reflection breathed with him, same rhythm, same pulse. For the first time that night, he didn't feel alone. He felt watched. And somewhere deep in that silence, beneath his skin, he realized the reflection wasn't following anymore. It was leading. The days began to blur. He would wake up without knowing if he'd slept, eat without tasting, and dance until the sun rose again. There were notebooks everywhere now, on the bed, the floor, the sink, each filled with fragments of lyrics and sketches of movement. Words that felt dictated, not written. The light bends when I look too long. He moves like I remember myself. Keep going. The reflection had stopped lagging. It moved perfectly in sync now, each gesture landing as though choreographed by an invisible metronome pulsing behind the glass. Sometimes Michael felt he was no longer learning the moves were learning him. He told no one. When his brothers asked, he smiled. When Neil demanded new material, he nodded. But inside, he was chasing something that no producer could see, a rhythm that existed beyond sound, a pulse that lived only in reflection. The rehearsal studio became his cathedral. He covered the mirrors with sheets during the day, afraid someone might walk in and see, not the reflection, but what it was doing to him. At night, he uncovered them again. The air in the room changed when the lights went off, colder, sharper. He felt it like a breath on the back of his neck. Sometimes, when exhaustion blurred the edges of things, he thought he saw the reflection move before him, teaching him new steps, new ways to bend time. He mimicked them all, copying until he could no longer tell which side of the glass he belonged to. And always, after every sequence, the voice came, faint but clear. Keep going. One night, after 12 straight hours of practice, he collapsed against the wall. Sweat slicked his skin, the room tilted and spun. "I'm done," he said to no one. The mirror pulsed softly, as if breathing. His reflection stepped forward. It was him, same clothes, same tired eyes, but the face had changed. Sharper lines, stronger posture, confidence radiating like heat. "You're not me," Michael whispered. The reflection smiled, almost sadly, and moved a single step closer to the surface. Michael's heart pounded. He pressed his palms to the floor to steady himself. "I said I'm done," he repeated. The reflection shook its head. Not in disapproval, in pity. "Keep going." The voice hit him again, deep in the chest. He screamed and hurled his hat at the mirror. The impact echoed, but the glass didn't break. It rippled. Just once. Like water. When he opened his eyes again, the mirror was still. But his reflection wasn't the same. It was standing where he had been sitting. The next morning, Neil burst into the rehearsal room, wearing that bright salesman grin that never reached his eyes. "Kid. Press tour next week. Smile, shake hands, tell them you're working on new music. That's all they need." Michael didn't answer. "You good?" Neil asked, finally noticing the state of the room, the darkened lights, the broken metronome, the faint smell of ozone. Michael's voice came out quiet, detached. "I'm not sure who's working on it anymore." Neil laughed, misreading it as metaphor. "That's the spirit. Channel that mystery." He left with a pat on the shoulder. The door closed, and Michael looked back at the mirror. His reflection was smiling again, but the grin was Neil's. He covered it with a sheet. The following days were worse. Every reflective surface in his apartment seemed alive. Spoons, windows, the television when turned off. Even puddles of water shimmered like eyes. He began to write at night, compulsively, as if trying to outpace the thing inside the glass. Lyrics poured out faster than he could understand them. Each line felt like a message from somewhere else. If you look long enough, the light starts to look back. Every reflection is a rehearsal for something real. He taught me how to stay still until the world moves first. His handwriting was changing, sharper, neater, almost mechanical. When he woke one morning, an entire page had been written in the night. "You're almost there." He didn't remember writing it. During rehearsals, his movements became frighteningly perfect. The others noticed. "Mike, man, you okay?" Marlon asked after one long night. "You've been different." Michael smiled without turning. "I'm getting better." "Better than perfect." Tito joked, but his laugh came out thin. When Michael finally looked at them, his eyes seemed deeper, darker, like there was another light burning behind them. "Better than human," he said softly. The room fell quiet. That evening, he went back to the studio alone. The sheet came off the mirror. The reflection was waiting, already in position. Michael approached slowly, barefoot, until only inches separated them. "Why me?" he asked. The words trembled. The reflection didn't answer. Instead, it began to move, not dancing, but demonstrating. A gesture, simple yet alien, the shoulders rolling like smoke, the head tilting backward as though pulled by invisible strings. Michael followed. Each movement felt less like effort, more like memory. The rhythm pulsed from within, bone to blood, breath to silence. When it ended, both of them stood still, mirror images breathing in sync. Then, faintly, the reflection lifted its hand and touched the glass where his heart was. The warmth spread again, this time not just to his chest, but to his throat, his spine, his fingertips. He gasped, dizzy. The world shimmered. The reflection's lips moved. He couldn't hear it this time, but he didn't need to. He already knew what it was saying. Keep going. Days turned into weeks. He started sketching stage designs, impossible ones. A single spotlight. A man dressed in black. Silence for 5 full seconds before the music began. He wrote, "Let the stillness be louder than the sound." He drew costumes, sharp silhouettes that would make light bend, shapes that turned the body into something mythic. He was planning a new era, something no one could name yet. Neil called it the future. Michael called it the mirror's dream. By the time the next showcase arrived, he wasn't nervous anymore. He wasn't anything. The night before, he stood in front of the mirror one last time. The reflection was radiant now, older, flawless, untouchable. Michael stared, exhausted, humbled, in awe of it. "What are you?" he whispered. The reflection leaned closer, the smile almost human. Then its voice came, not from the glass, but from inside him. "I'm what you're becoming." Michael's knees buckled. He pressed a hand to the floor, the wood warm under his palm. The reflection didn't kneel. It stayed upright, towering, haloed by silver light. He tried to look away. Couldn't. The voice again. Soft. Endless. Tomorrow, we step through. The night of the showcase was electric. The venue smelled of sweat and varnish, the air thick with heat and expectation. Michael stood behind the curtain, hat in hand, heartbeat synced to the rhythm no one else could hear. Neil's voice boomed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Jackson. Applause. Polite, curious, waiting. He stepped into the light. The room dimmed around him. For a moment, the mirrors lining the stage caught his image, dozens of him, infinite. And every single one smiled before he did. He moved once, sharply. The crowd gasped. No music. Just motion. Every gesture perfect, deliberate, sacred. Then the reflection, his reflection, from the back of the room, moved differently. A split second ahead, like it was guiding him. He followed. They danced together, boy and image, flesh and illusion. When the sequence ended, he froze mid-slide, chest heaving. The reflection raised its hand, pointed upward. Michael followed instinctively. Light burst from the ceiling like revelation. The audience erupted. When the lights went out, he was still frozen, hand lifted, eyes wide, not in triumph, but recognition. He had seen himself. All of himself. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Backstage, the world was chaos. Neil shouted over everyone, slapping backs, laughing like a man who'd just watched history being made. But Michael barely heard him. He sat in front of the dressing room mirror again. The crack had returned, thin and clean, running straight down the middle. His reflection was smiling, tired, proud, infinite. "What happens now?" he whispered. The reflection mouthed the words. "Keep going." Then, for the first time, the glass didn't shimmer. It split. A perfect fracture dividing him from himself. Michael didn't flinch. He just smiled back. The morning after the showcase felt like the city had been washed in frost. Nothing moved the same way. People still smiled at him, still called him a miracle and a star and a promise, but under their praise he felt a colder current, a pull toward the place only he could see. He returned to the studio alone, unlocked the door, and stood before the long mirror like a pilgrim before a shrine. The crack down the center was flawless now, so precise it looked intentional, like a seam between two worlds. He set down his hat and waited for his breath to steady. When he finally lifted his eyes, the reflection was already there, already waiting, already smiling like a teacher who knew exactly how the lesson would end. He whispered that he was ready. The reflection didn't move at first. It seemed to listen, like it could hear the room breathing, like it could hear him. Then the rhythm started, not through the speakers but through his body, a pulse rising from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. He moved without planning to move, responded without deciding to respond. The mirror matched him perfectly and not at all, somehow leading and following in the same breath, keeping him suspended on a thin silver line between imitation and invention. When he missed a step, the reflection didn't correct him so much as erase the mistake, obliterating it from the logic of the moment, making the misstep part of the design. He felt himself lifted and emptied, like the space inside him had been cleared for a greater brightness. The days afterward dissolved into each other. He ate when he remembered, slept when the light on the wall shifted from blue to pale to gold to blue again. In the margins of his notebooks he wrote sentences he didn't remember thinking. Let stillness make sound, make silence louder than applause, draw the crowd forward with breath alone. He drew a stage that was mostly darkness and a body that turned darkness into geometry. He wrote a single word at the bottom of the page and underlined it twice, becoming, and then folded the page and slid it into the crack of the mirror as if the glass could keep it safe. When Neil knocked, when the brothers called, when the phone rang with interviews and parties and camera requests, he turned everything down with a gentleness that sounded like fog. He was busy, he said, and he was, though busy seemed too small a word. He was being tuned, refined, welded to something beyond himself. He began to speak less and move more. Even offstage, even in a kitchen reaching for a glass, He could feel the air listening to him, could feel his reflection a half-inch behind his shoulder, a ghostly twin measuring his choices the way a conductor measures silence. The first rumor slithered out through someone who had heard someone who had seen him late at night in the rehearsal room talking to the mirror, as if it were a person. The rumor found a reporter who liked metaphors and a producer who liked trouble, and by the time it reached the papers it had grown a tail and teeth. Michael rehearses with a ghost. He laughed when he read it, and then he didn't. It felt less like mockery and more like confession. He remembered the shop mirror that had rippled like water, remembered the warm glass under his hand, the feeling of pressure at his chest like a hand he couldn't touch. He closed the paper and went back to the studio, to the hum behind the silver, to the pulse that had replaced sleep. He covered the walls with mirrors, not out of vanity but out of hunger, needing more angles, more entries, more ways for light to tell him the truth. Some panes were new, so clean they looked like holes in the room, others were cracked and dark with age. In each one he found a version of himself that seemed adjacent to the life he was living, a version that walked half a beat ahead, another that smiled a fraction long after the joke had died. He learned to accept the differences the way one accepts weather. Sometimes the air was heavy and sometimes the air was bright. In that multiplicity, he felt the outline of the thing he had been chasing since the first time the mirror blinked late. Not mastery, not approval, but alignment. The body with the idea, the breath with the silence, the boy with the man. There were nights he felt the fear rise like dark water. Those were the nights the mirror did not move, the nights it held him steadily, patiently, like a friend who knows the worst and waits beside you anyway. On those nights he spoke aloud to no one and someone. He said he didn't want to vanish inside the role of himself. He said he didn't want to trade his face for a mask that couldn't come off. He asked for a sign that this was not madness dressed as sainthood. He asked for mercy and got, instead, an instruction: keep going, and the strange mercy was that he obeyed. The project that followed had no name until it named itself. He filled reels with breath and heartbeat and the thud of his feet on wood. He recorded silence and found rhythm folded inside it like a paper crane. He sang into a mic with his mouth closed and captured a hum that did not come from his throat. He slowed the tape until the air turned into vowels, sped it until consonants cracked into sparks. The brothers asked to hear. He let them hear only the parts that sounded like music. The rest he kept for himself and the mirror. A duet that didn't require two voices to be two. The label wanted a date. He gave them a night. They rented a small theater that smelled like varnish and nostalgia. He brought a band and told them to begin only when he breathed twice in a row, and if he never breathed twice in a row, they should not begin at all. He said it gently, and they nodded without understanding. He chose a costume that swallowed the room's light and returned it as edges. He walked the stage before anyone arrived and mapped each floorboard by its creak, each empty seat by its silence. He touched the back wall and whispered that he would try to be faithful. When the audience filed in, they brought their lives with them like coats. He could feel their chatter, their hopes, their hunger. He could feel the press in the second row rehearsing their adjectives. He had no adjectives to offer them, only time. He let them wait. He let the anticipation tighten into a single thin wire and then, simply, he stepped into his spot and let the wire cut him open. The first movement was not a movement but its absence. He did nothing, and the room surged forward like a tide. The second movement was a breath the length of a heartbeat and the depth of a well, and when his chest rose the band did not begin, and when his chest fell the band did not begin, and on the next inhale he felt the reflection step into the space behind his left shoulder and the band still did not begin. The third movement was the smallest tilt of the head, a fraction of a nod. A murmur rose. A tremor moved through the seats like the memory of thunder. Then the band entered, not with noise but with weight, and the floor grew solid under his feet, and he slid backward on a surface he could not name and stopped on a point in the air that should not have held him, and the theater gasped because they all saw the body obey a logic colder and kinder than gravity. Midway through the piece, he felt the mirror surge. It was as if the glass had stepped through him and out into the room, as if the two halves of his fractured reflection had found a way to be one body without asking his permission. He let it have him. He let it borrow his bones. He realized then that the secret was not that the reflection was leading, but that he had always been a reflection, a result, an answer to a question the music had been asking since the first time he heard a beat heavier than breath. Afterward, he did not bow. He stood and let the applause decide if it would be enough to cover the silence he was leaving behind. He went backstage without speaking, sat before the dressing room mirror, and watched the crack run through his face like a promise. He whispered, "What happens now?" and did not expect an answer. The answer came anyway, "Keep going," and then the glass split with a sound like a key turning in a lock. The next morning the first reel disappeared. Neil swore he hadn't touched a thing. The brothers swore they had stayed out, but the drawer that had held the tape was empty, and a thin dust of shattered silver lay on the floor beneath the mirror like frost. He bent and pressed a finger to it and felt the faintest vibration, like a pulse trying to remember when to beat. He wiped his finger on his shirt and laughed in a way that didn't sound like laughter. By the end of the week, 2 more reels were gone. The 4th was found unspooled across the studio floor like a black ribbon, tiny waves baked into the tape as if it had been left in the sun too long. He ran it, anyway. When the machine found speed, the speakers filled with a sound like water walking uphill. Beneath that sound was his voice and not his voice, layered and thin as smoke, saying a single sentence over and over, "Do you remember who you are?" The question didn't end in a question mark. He stopped the machine and stood in the quiet and felt the mirror's attention on the back of his neck, the way you feel the attention of a crowd before you see their faces. He locked the door. He turned every mirror to face the wall except the long one, the first one, the one with the perfect seam. He switched off the overhead lights and let the city's breath bleed in through the high windows, a blue-gray that made edges crisp. He stood barefoot on the cool wood and waited for the small fear to crest and fade. When it did, he said he was ready and meant it. The mirror brightened, just slightly. He stepped forward. The glass gave, not like water this time, but like skin, a surface with memory. He did not push through. He did not press. He simply allowed. The seam widened by an inch, then another. He smelled ozone and rain and the inside of a violin. He heard the sound of feet on wood that were not his feet and the sound of breath in a chest that was not his chest and yet fit him. He lowered his head and closed his eyes and felt himself become lighter, as if every cell had been taught how to hum. When he opened his eyes, he was still in the room and not in the room, still before the mirror and not before it. The crack shone like a thread pulled from the fabric of the world. His reflection stood opposite him and lifted a hand, and he lifted his, and the 2 palms hovered over the seam. He could feel warmth through nothing. He could feel something like sorrow, like gratitude, like inevitability. He whispered that he did not want to leave the boy he had been. The reflection whispered back that he did not have to. For a breath that lasted longer than a life, they were one. The door shuddered suddenly. Someone, Neil, shouted his name. The light snapped harsh and white and ordinary. The seam closed without a sound. The mirror returned to plain glass. He stood alone, breath fast and eyes wet, and the room smelled like hot dust again, like the end of a show. The door opened. Neil stared, took in the dark, the single mirror, the empty reels. He said history like it was a currency he could spend. Michael nodded like he would allow it to be spent. He slept for a day and woke with a strange stillness. The fear was gone, replaced by a clarity that made every decision simple. Say no to what was false, say yes to what was true, let the rest starve. He assembled the record from what remained, the breath, the floor, the small sounds between sounds, the places where time bent and returned, the trace of a second voice that registered more as temperature than tone. He titled it and untitled it and stopped naming altogether. He let the music be itself and let the mirrors keep their secrets. When the album slipped into the world, it didn't explode so much as bloom in dark rooms. People played it late, lights off, headphones on. Strangers who had never agreed about anything agreed that it sounded like a body remembering itself, like a prayer that did not ask, like a confession stripped of apology. Some swore they could hear a second heartbeat under the drums. Some said the songs changed tempo with their own breathing. Some said they had seen something in the TV screen between tracks, a figure standing just behind them, still as a held note. The papers argued about innovation and influence disguised as innovation, and never touched the thing itself. He let them talk. He had nothing left to explain. On a grey afternoon, he returned to the small music shop with the cracked mirror between the amplifiers. The owner looked up and looked away, like a man trying to respect a hurricane. Michael crossed to the back and stood before the old glass. It warbled his outline and silvered his eyes. He smiled at the cheapness of it, at the way it didn't pretend to be anything but broken. He leaned close enough to see the thin lines of age within it, the spidering veins that made it honest. He whispered thank you to no one in particular and turned to go. In the reflection that wasn't really a reflection, a hand lifted and waved. He did not look back to prove or disprove it. He left the store and walked into a light rain that felt like the world had forgiven him for something he had not yet done. He kept working. He kept moving. He learned how to hold still until a stadium learned to breathe with him and then exhale when he did. He learned how little it took to direct the hearts of 1,000 strangers. 2 seconds of silence, a finger to the sky. He learned how to leave. Not forever. Just for a moment that taught him which parts of himself were portable. He learned that fame was an echo and legacy a rumor, and the only durable thing the line his feet drew on the floor when the music asked for a shape. When the last session ended, when the last reel clicked to its soft stop, he sat alone in the studio with the mirror and listened to the quiet for long enough that it became song. He wrote one final sentence on one final scrap and slid it under the frame. If the man in the mirror finds you first, follow him only until you can hear yourself. Then he stood and put on his hat and touched his fingers to the seam. The glass was cold again. The room was only a room. Later, no one could decide how much later, the tape surfaced, not the songs but the unedited rehearsal audio no one remembered turning on. A breath, a step, a pulse like a question without a mark. People said it proved something. Others said it proved the opposite. Engineers tried to isolate the second voice and found it, more than once, in the silence between noises, where waveforms flatten and machines shrug. Interviews followed, and words piled up, and from beneath the pile a simpler truth pressed its head. He had turned himself inside out to become the thing he had always been. Near the end of the year, someone noticed a line etched faintly into the studio mirror, visible only when the afternoon sun bent low. Music is what remains when silence learns your name. Beneath the line was the suggestion of a handprint, smaller than his and shaped precisely like warmth. He did not vanish. He did what he had been told to do. He kept going. He kept going through applause and after it. He kept going under light and when the light failed. He kept going in rehearsal rooms and kitchens and cars and stairwells and in the tired hours when a body wants to collapse and a spirit will not permit it. He kept going because the lesson had not been how to enter the mirror, but how to let the mirror enter him. How to carry the seam inside like a compass. And yet there was the night, call it legend or footnote, when the building's power went out mid-practice and generators coughed and died and the emergency exit sign lit the glass in a red that made it look like a doorway. A guard swore he saw 2 silhouettes on the far wall when the door finally swung open, one with a hat and one without, both turning their heads at the exact same time. The light returned and there was only him, smiling the tired, grateful smile of a man who has borrowed fire and returned it. The last page in his final notebook held only 2 words, scented and clean, traced over once with a silver pen that had nearly run dry. No date. No signature. Keep going. Epilogue. Years later, in a quiet house on the other side of the world, someone presses play on the record at midnight, not to test a rumor but to be alone. A small lamp glows. The window is a black sheet. On the second track, the drums feel like footsteps down a hallway, and the singer's breath is a soft wether, and the room seems to lean forward to listen. The lamp flickers, just once, and steadies. In the dark glass of the window, a shape appears where no shape should be, too brief to be fear, too gentle to be anything but recognition. The listener turns, sees no one, turns back, and decides not to tell anyone what did or did not happen. The needle lifts. The night thins. Somewhere, Wood remembers a foot that taught it how to sing. The mirror, wherever it is, holds a faint print that does not fade. And in rooms where the silence knows your name, if you wait long enough after the last note falls, you can still hear a voice, not loud and not far, saying something that is not a command but a gift. Keep going.